is that the government exists, first and foremost? The primary purpose of government is to secure inalienable rights. It's not to create a great economy. It's not to secure the borders. All those are important. The first thing is to do is to make sure you have the right to practice your God-given rights, which was not going on in the world at the time. All across the world, all those God-given rights, people were being killed for exercising God-given purpose. We exist, number one, is to make sure you can do those. Now, once we get that secured, we'll come along and take care of all these other things. But the primary purpose, so that's the primary purpose of government. Now, significantly going back to founding fathers like James Wilson, and Wilson, by the way, is one of only 6 founding fathers to sign the Declaration and the Constitution. He's put on the original Supreme Court with George Washington. He started the first law school in America and wrote the first law textbooks in America. I've got his actual law textbooks. Look what he told students. And here's the second most active member of the Constitutional Convention, spoken in Florida Convention 168 times. Look what he told students about why American government came into existence. He said, the principal object of government was to acquire a new security, possession of those rights which we were previously entitled by the immediate gift of our all-wise and all-beneficent Creator. You see, students, what we had in Great Britain, we had a set of rights that were protected by the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights. We had all these God-given rights, but then the government started infringing on those God-given rights. And it got to the point where we couldn't practice our God-given rights. That's why we created a new security for old rights that we had enjoyed, because the government would no longer let us enjoy our inalienable rights. So that's why we had to birth America, because we wanted a government that would protect God-given rights that had been protected by Great Britain, but no longer were being protected politically. So that's what we understood. You have the same thing with Sam Adams. Sam Adams says, government was originally designed for the preservation of the inalienable rights. That's why government exists. And by the way, this is where he said, first was the right to life, secondly, liberty, thirdly, property. Now let me stop here for a moment. Because when you look at this, you see that phrase, first is the right to life? Wow. With all the Planned Parenthood stuff and everything else we've done, wouldn't it have been cool if they had been talking about abortion, but and obviously they weren't, because abortion, Roe v. Wade, 1973, that obviously was an issue back then. People say that, but you know, the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. And you will find out that the first ban on homosexuals in the military came from George Washington in March of 1778. It was an issue back then, too. You will find that these guys wrote extensively about the abortion issue. You will find that they were having creation-evolution debates long before Darwin did his thing. See, Darwin didn't create anything new. Darwin took 2,500 years of evolutionary writings and synthesized in one book, The Origin of Species. He didn't create something new. He just synthesized what was out there way back in 1802. The senior paper written by Daniel Webster at Dartmouth University was going through the creation-evolution debate, showing why evolution was wrong and creation was right. See, these are all issues they dealt with a long time. Social issues we deal with today, nothing new for them. As a matter of fact, one of the most fun calls I've ever had, of all the documents we have, we get called all the time by folks saying, hey, do you suppose the Founding Fathers had an opinion on whatever? And that's how we found out that homosexuals in the military. When Bill Clinton lifted the ban on homosexuals in the military, we had leadership in the Marine Corps call and said, you know, you think the Founding Fathers had a... We don't have a clue. We looked, and yeah, that's where the ban got started. It was in George Washington, March of 1778. Well, I also got a call 7 years ago from members on the floor. They were voting at that point on the TARP stimulus kind of stuff that was going at the time. And they called, literally, somebody called their cell phone or something off the floor, and I could hear the debate going in the background. Three members on it said, do you think the Founding Fathers had an opinion on whether there were private businesses that were too big to be allowed to fail, that the federal government should bail out? I don't have a clue. We looked, and in 1792, James Madison led the debate over why government should not bail out private businesses that were too big. Exactly the same debate. Unbelievable. He said, if you allow the federal government to bail out private businesses that are too big to fail, the next thing you know, the federal government will start getting involved in education, start getting involved in highways, they'll start getting, and he went through all the stuff the government would get involved with if we let them bail out private business. Looks like we're exactly there today. So there is nothing new on. So when they talked about a right to life, they literally meant that. As a matter of fact, here's one of the books in our library. This is Abortion in America in 1808. Really? Yeah, see, way back then they're having the debates. And that's why when you say first is a right to life, they literally did mean the abortion issue. As a matter of fact, let's go back for a moment to James Wilson, those law books he had. Look what he said about the abortion issue in his law books, talking to students. He said, students, with consistency, beautiful and undeviating, human life from its commencement to its close is protected by the common law. Notice that it's the 7th Amendment of the Constitution that authorizes and recognizes the common law. We were told abortion was under the 9th Amendment and 14th Amendment. Got it all wrong. It was under the 7th Amendment, according to James Wilson, who is one of the chief authors of the Constitution. He continued. He says, in the contemplations of law, life begins when the infant is first able to stir in the womb, and by the law that life is protected. It's protected by the common law of the Seventh Amendment. You see, what they said was as soon as you know there's life on the inside, at that point it's protected by law because government exists to protect inalienable rights, and the first of all inalienable rights is the right to life. If you don't have your life, it's hard to enjoy liberty or property or income or anything else. It starts with life. Now, he says when life begins, when the infant is first able to stir in the womb. Back then, how long did that take you? It might take 3 months before you knew for sure there was life on the inside, but as soon as you knew it's protected. Today, we know within 6 days of conception that there's life in the womb. Yes. The point is that, see, it's technology that changes. Issues don't change. Technology does. Yes. Technology is different. As soon as you know there's life in the womb, at that point we step and say that life is protected. You see, that's what made us different from Europe. Because back then, Europe believed that parents gave life to children. In America, we believe God gave life to children. It wasn't parents that gave life. But see, because Europe believed that they gave life to children, they also allowed parents to take the life of children through abortion. We didn't allow that in America. That's why John Witherspoon, signer of the Declaration, president of Princeton, he said, a perfect right in the state of natural liberty is the right to life. He said in Europe, they let parents take the life of the kids because they think it's parents that give life. He said, but here in America, we deny the power of life and death of parents. We don't let this happen because it's not parents that give life, it's God that gives life. So it's an inalienable right. Now, let me take the word first and just spend a little bit of time on that for just a second. Because I've been involved in the political world for a long time. A lot of you guys remember I used to help run the state party here in Texas for 9 years. And so over the course of that time, I literally have recruited hundreds of candidates for office. I've trained thousands of candidates for office. I deal with thousands of candidates for office today across the nation. And in that period of time, I have learned something politically. And that is, if I can find out where someone is first on the life issue, with a 90% certainty, I can tell you how they will vote on every other issue. You give me a U.S. Senator and tell me where that U.S. Senator is on the life issue, I'll tell you what they did with the Small Arms Treaty. I'll tell you what they did on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'll tell you what they did on global warming. I'll tell you what they did with raising the capital gains tax. You tell me where they are on life, and with a 90% degree of certainty, I will tell you where they are on every other issue. Now, why is that? Because the life is the first of inalienable rights. If you won't protect the first, you're really bad at protecting the second, third, fourth, fifth. See, once you get off track, you're off track. You know, you fly a plane, you drive a car, you get off the road. Once you get off the road, you're off the road. And see, the problem is, if you're wrong on the life issue, nearly always those folks are also wrong on the First Amendment right to worship God according to the dictates of Hobby Lobby. What are you thinking? You don't have a conscience. You're a business. Little Sisters of the Poor. You can't see, we're having conscience fights in America we've not had in 200 years. But then again, we've got the most pro-abortion administration we've had in 200 years. In the first 4 years of the Obama administration, there were 271 acts that promoted abortion in 4 years. We've never had a pro-abortion administration like it, and they don't seem to be really good on rights of conscience. Well, that's first. See, you get off on the first one. And by the way, if you're wrong on the life issue, you'll be wrong on the Second Amendment right to defend yourself, what the founders called the biblical right of self-defense. It seems like this administration is not real good on gun rights. They're in the gun control. And by the way, if you're wrong on life issue, you're nearly always wrong on the sanctity of the home. And it's interesting to me that those who are wrong on the life issue don't seem to know how to define marriage. They seem to have real difficulty understanding the home as it was traditionally defined. If you're wrong on the life issue, you'll be wrong on the Fifth Amendment right to protection of private property. You'll think the government owns the property. You're just kind of using it from the government. And if you don't do it right, the government will take it away from you and give it to somebody. I mean, we saw that in the Kelo decision. We've seen that in so many other things. So granted, all of these are called social issues, and all the political pundits today say, well, Americans don't care about the social issues. All they care about are the economic issues. That's all they. Let's play for a minute that that's true. And in the Republican Party, particularly in Texas, that is not true. You'll find that we have balanced conservatives here in Texas. We believe in social and economic things. We very rarely are split into one or the other. Conservatives, we're not schizophrenic. I mean, we're conservative on all things, social and economic. But let's just play for a minute that's true. Now, one of the things that happens in Congress that John alluded to, 488 votes he's already had. John, this is his first session in Congress. And so here we are this far in, already 488 votes. I asked a group of 500 folks the other day, I said, you know, tell me the issues you've heard that Congress has covered in the last session, 2 years of the session. or first session, second session of the Congress. And between all of them, 3 issues. 3. Every session of Congress, between 10 and 13,000 bills are introduced every session of Congress. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of votes, and you don't hear about most of them. Now, what happens is that's why there are all sorts of groups in D.C. that spend all their time watching particular issues. There'll be groups that monitor every Iran vote. You have groups that monitor every Navy vote, every armed forces vote, every agriculture vote. They all do that. Same with life. I mean, if you look at life groups, there's National Right to Life. There'll be dozens of life votes that come in this session of Congress. And they will take those live votes and they will record and say, well, here's the best members of the U.S. House, 425 members in the House. Here's our best live representatives. And they number them from 100%ers down to 0%ers. And here's, there's 435. Can't put them all up there. There's, what, 10 or 15? Oh, there's Louis there, by the way, 100%er right there. You got Louis at 100%. But remember, we don't care about social issues. All we care about economic issues. So, if that's true, what we do is we look at the voting records compiled like groups like Americans for Prosperity. We'll look at American Taxpayer Union. We'll look at Freedom Works. We'll look at all these other groups. And if you take Americans for Prosperity and take their 100%ers down to 0%ers, look at that. It's almost a 1-to-1 correlation. If you're good on the life, there's Louis again. He's got 100% on economic, 100% on life. See? Where you are on the life issues is the best indicator of where you are on economic issues as well. It tells you the whole philosophy of that person. If you look at the worst life representatives, here's the 0%ers, and you take Americans for Prosperity and look at the worst economic representatives, almost a 1-to-1 correlation. But it makes perfect sense, because if they won't protect your life, why would they protect your money? Your life's worth a whole lot more than your money is. So, having said that, when the Founding Father says first is the right to life, that's the best indication of both economic and social positions, best indicator of whether they're going to grow government or limit government. This is good. And by the way, one of the things I've also learned, for whatever reason, there's people who think that if I help endorse their race, that will help them in some way. And so I get people coming all the time on endorsements. And, here comes a dog catcher, and he wants me to endorse in his race. And I will ask him, what's your position on abortion? Did you not hear me? I said dog catcher. You have nothing to do with abortion. I know. But you might not say dog catcher. You might run for school board. You might run for city council and mayor. You might run for state rep, state senate, governor. It's a heck of a lot easier to knock you off as a dog catcher than it is to knock you off as a judge. And so what you do is you create a test down early and you start building a farm team that has the right philosophy. Well, you know what they do in the public utility district doesn't have anything to do with abortion. No, but the whole philosophy of government, whether the government is, number one, recognizes God, that God gives certain rights, the government exists to protect those rights. You can find out all that by where they're on abortion. So that's the third. Let's go through the other two real quickly and wrap this up. The fourth, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station which the laws of nature, nature's God entitles them. What that phrase has just told us is that there is a fixed moral law. Now people look at that and say, how'd you get a fixed moral law out of that? Well, very simply, it's because of the phrase there that was very recognizable to every American in that day. There's an 8-word phrase, the laws of nature and nature's God. There's 2 4-word phrases there, the laws of nature and of nature's God. Those 2 phrases come out of the most significant law book in that generation, Blackstone's Commentaries to the Law. Thomas Jefferson said Americans studied that law book like Muslims studied the Quran. Everybody knew what that 4-word phrase meant because it came out of Blackstone. And Blackstone said that 4-word phrase is actually the dual revelation of God that we see in the Scriptures. People say, whoa, there's not 2 revelations again. There is. Dual revelation of God. I don't know about you, but I'm a Christian, and critics say, you guys say you have a loving God. How can you have a loving God if you would send people to hell that have never heard the gospel? Huh? What's your answer for that? I use the same answer Paul used. In Romans 1:20, Paul says, everything that can be known about God, including the intricacies of the Godhead. Oh, we're getting deep theology now. Paul says everything that can be known about God, including the intricacies of the Godhead, have been revealed through what He has created, so that even the heathen are without excuse. Whoa, you mean that the creation of God is so thorough that you can understand even theology? Yeah. And by the way, I will point out, for those of us that live in the country and are around the creation of God. Do you know how hard it is to find an atheist in the country? You find atheists in cities, you don't find atheists in the country. When you're around God's creation, it's really easy to see God's handiwork in so many things. And so that's the first revelation. So let's take a little exercise here for a moment. We're just going to look at the laws of nature. And we're not going to use any scriptures, don't care about the Bible for a minute. We're just going to say, what does the laws of nature tell us about things like self-defense? Now, self-defense, I want to back off here to my country background for a bit, because being a cowboy, one of the things I enjoy is being on a horse and being outside, doing all sorts of outside work. But I've also got this thing, I speak about 600 times a year. So 2 or 3 times a year, I'll get with my cowboy friends, we'll load a horse and we'll just ride to some place where we can just disappear and ride. We like going to really rugged places, being really remote places where we don't know if anybody's been there in 50 years. We like riding through places like that. And there's a lot of tough areas where we go, very rugged areas where we get into it, very hard area. And one of the things you got to have is you got to have a horse you can really trust. And so we put a lot of time and money in our horses. We take very good care of them. They're fed well. They got great vets. They got a great place to live. Because if I stick the nose of my horse off that cliff and say, go down that gulch trail on the side, my life and her life depend on her doing exactly that. We get to the bottom and say, swim that river. I mean, we just got a great relationship, but we have to trust each other. And so in doing that, we put a lot of time into our horses. Well, one of our horses recently had a little foal, and when she had that foal, great trail horse, had that foal, go into the barn to feed her, you'll come out with a hoof print right in the middle of your forehead. Doesn't matter what your relationship is, there's something that kicks into her that says, you're not getting close to my young. I will protect my young. I'll protect my life, my young's life. And by the way, get out of my house. It's not your house. I built the barn. I'm the one who feeds you there. She thinks that's her house because that's where she lives. It is a law of nature. Whatever the species is, they will defend themselves, they will defend their young, and they will defend their dwelling place, their abode. See, that's why we're in Texas, we're allowed to use deadly force to protect property. That's part of our abode, part of our dwelling place. So I don't need this. I don't need Exodus 22:2. I don't need Luke 19. I don't need Nehemiah 4 or Nehemiah 8 to tell me I have the right of self-defense. Laws of nature tell me that. You have the same thing with liberty. More than 10 million species of nature, there's not a single species that enslaves any other species. Raccoons don't enslave elk, and mice don't enslave snakes. It doesn't happen. Well, why didn't the Founding Fathers follow that? See, we've been told the Founding Fathers are all a bunch of pro-slavery guys. There are far more Founding Fathers who are anti-slavery advocates than pro-slavery. As a matter of fact, the anti-slavery guys nailed the pro-slavery Founding Fathers, said it's against the laws. There is no species in nature that enslaves. You're doing something that violates the laws of nature. By the way, there's a lot of Bible verses on that too, but you're violating laws of nature. You have the same thing with abortions. You know, with 10 billion species in nature, not a single one kills its young still in the womb. I do not need all the Bible verses against abortion. I can just tell you there's nothing. I don't care whether you believe in evolution or creation. I'm a creation guy. If you believe in evolution, fine. There's nothing in your process that kills young while it's still in the womb. That's a violation of the laws of nature. Same with homosexuality. 10 million species that are out there. There are a couple of species that have homosexuality, but even in those species, it's always aberration. There is no homosexual lifestyle in 10 million species, which is why up to 15 years ago, the federal courts did not call homosexuality a moral crime. They called it a crime against nature up to 15 years ago because it violates all natural law. You have the same thing with property. From the time an animal comes into the world, it stakes out what it will live on, and whether it's a beaver, whether it's a pack rat, or whatever it is. Now, when it dies, something else will take that property and live on it, but there's a right to property. See, the Founding Fathers identified about 24 animal rights. You look what do the laws of nature tell us about theft? Ooh, that gets a little tricky. My 4 horses that I ride, if I feed them all, they all steal from each other. They won't eat their own food. They'll go take what they can from everybody else. It would appear that theft is a law of nature. And adultery, that's a law of nature. That's why you have 1 bull and 40 cows in every herd. I mean, monogamy is not common in nature. Then you've got this problem of incest. See, that's why cowboys don't ride Mustangs, because they've been inbred for so long, they have no stamina, no strength. You cannot take a Mustang in a hard ride because they just don't stand up to it. You have the same problem with murder. You ever seen what a skunk does in a hen house? They don't do that because they're eating. They spread blood everywhere. Well, now wait a minute. If the laws of nature give us all these answers, what do you do with that? Well, that's where we have the other forward phrase. That is the laws of nature's God. Let me be really clear here. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't murder. See, between the laws of nature and nature's God, which literally are the rights and wrongs in the Scriptures, which is what we call the common law, This is the fixed moral law that America has. We don't vote on these things. These are fixed by the laws of nature and nature's God. These are not up for vote. The fifth and final point that they had in American exceptionalism is this point. Governments are instituted by men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, this is what we call consent of the governed or majority rule. For example, George Washington says this about this principle. George Washington says, the fundamental principle of our Constitution requires that the will of the majority shall prevail. By the way, that's why the Founding Fathers did not allow filibusters in the Senate or anywhere else. Because what Louis is talking about right now, even with the Corker bill, when you have a supermajority that's required, like in the Senate, you have to have 60 votes to break the filibuster. That means 40 can be 60 every day of the week. Votes in the Senate, if 40 vote against it, they win. Wait, it's supposed to be 51. See, that's why Republicans are going to have such a hard time ever getting anything done in the Senate, because unless you get 62 or 63 Republicans in the Senate, which is really hard to do, it's hard to move the Senate in the right direction. Now, leadership also helps, and we don't have that at this point in time. But nonetheless, that's why the Founding Fathers did not allow filibusters, because the will of the majority is no longer in charge. It's the will of the minority that now controls the majority. Thomas Jefferson, who founded the other political party, the Anti-Federalist Party, said this. He says, the will of the majority, the natural law of every society, is the only sure guardian of the rights of man. So both the Federalists and Anti-Federalists said, this is really clear, majority wins every time, consent of the government. Now these are the 5 principles, and notice the sequence of these 5 principles. You start with there is a divine creator. The divine creator gives certain inalienable rights. The government exists to protect those rights. There is a fixed moral law, and there's the consent of the government. Notice the sequencing there. Now, you start, and let's talk about the consent of the government for a moment, because what happens in the sequencing there, the majority is not allowed to vote on inalienable rights. If we say you no longer have a right to self-defense, we had a vote here and we decided about 73-27 margin you can't defend yourself. Doesn't matter what the vote says, I've got a God-given right to defend myself, and I will. You can't vote on my right to exercise God-given rights. Well, we had a vote on moral law, and we decided by referendum we had that rape was no longer a crime. By a margin of 72-28, that you don't vote on moral rights and wrongs. Those are fixed rights and wrongs. And so, well, then if you can't, what do you vote on? Well, you can vote on whether you want the sidewalks to be 6 feet wide, or 6.5 feet wide, or 7 feet wide. You can vote on whether the speed limit should be 35 or 45, 55, or 85 if you're in office. You can vote on all these things, but you don't get to vote on inalienable rights or moral rights and wrongs. That's why, if you don't understand these, this goes back to the premise of secular government can never be a limited government. It's those first 4 points that keep us limited government. The more secular we become, and the President now on 7 occasions when he quotes the Declaration of Independence deliberately has left the word creator out. I thought the first 1 or 2 maybe he just didn't get it right. When you do it 7 times in a row, you're really working on creating a secular government, and it will not protect those rights. So the final point I'll make with this is this jurisdictional thing. We talked about having jurisdictional lines. Jesus did this really well in Matthew 22:21, where Jesus said, you render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God. There's certain things that go in certain jurisdictions, and the problem you always have with government is government wants to be God. It's not that God wants to be government. I mean, that's not the issue. The church is not trying to take over government. It's always the government trying to take over the church. That's the way it had been in England. That's the way all over Europe. State-established churches where they come in and they take over the church and they say, here's what doctrines you can and can't preach. See, we're at that point now where we're having these non-discrimination ordinances where the city is saying, pastors, here's what you can and can't talk about in your pulpit. And we have 205 of these cities that have now passed these that allow the city to do what they did in Houston, subpoena the sermons of pastors and whatever because the government wants to take over the pulpit. So jurisdictional lines become really important. Now, this is really interesting to see how we used to handle the issue of marriage. Because Genesis 1-3, before there was ever government, God created a man and a woman. He put them together and said, this is very good. Everything else was good. This is very good. And so they're together. And then you get over to Matthew 19. The disciples were talking to Jesus about no-fault divorce. And he said, don't you guys remember that at the beginning he made them male and female and said, whatever God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Jesus defined marriage as a lifelong union of a man and a woman. Right. Now, that's a biblical definition. God's the one who created marriage before there ever was government, so you can't go over and spray paint it red because marriage doesn't belong to government. It belonged to God before government ever came into existence. Interestingly, our Texas courts used to know that. This is a case from 1913, the Texas Supreme Court, a case called Grigsby versus Reed. Look how well we used to understand jurisdictional lines. And by the way, the question in this court was whether we in Texas could create civil unions. That was the question. Can you have you religious people have your marriage. How about us secular people have our marriage? And on that question of whether there could be a secular alternative to marriage, this is what the Texas Supreme Court said. Marriage was not originated by human law. When God created Eve, she was a wife to Adam. They then there occupied the status of husband to wife and wife to husband. The truth is that civil government has grown out of marriage, which created homes and population society from which government became necessary. Marriages will produce a home and family that will contribute to good government, to free and just government, support of Christianity. It would be sacrilegious to apply the designation of civil contract to such a marriage. Amen. It's that and more. It's a status ordained by God. We're not allowed to spray paint this red. It doesn't belong to us. This belongs to... See, that's jurisdictional limitation. That's the only way you get a limited government. When you get a government that wants to define anything it wants to define the way it wants to define it, you no longer have a constitutional republic. And that's the crisis point where we are right now. But we can't move back in the right direction if we don't know what those first 5 points are. So, in looking at a secular government cannot be a limited government, Thomas Jefferson, first book he ever wrote was 1781. From that book, they made quotes in the Jefferson Memorial engraved in stone. This is one of the 5 tableaus they have in the Jefferson Memorial. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis? Now, newsflash here, Thomas Jefferson is one of the 5 least religious founding fathers. 250 founding fathers is one of the 5 least religious. And he says, what's the only firm basis for national liberties? He said, it's a conviction. Notice the word conviction. It's a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with His wrath. He said, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and His justice won't sleep forever. Yes. Understand, the least religious founding father said the only security you have for national liberties is to have a conviction in your mind that these liberties come from God, and that if you start screwing around with them, you're going to tick Him off, and He gets ticked off, we're all going to get in a lot of trouble. Yeah, that's your least religious founding father, reminding the country of where we're going to go. So, that's the philosophy. If you can get those 5 points down, use that to everything you look at as you go through the 17 Republican presidential candidates going through right now. That's the grid and the paradigm you use. You want somebody that's going to lead the nation back in the right direction? If they're after economics first, we're going to have trouble here because you got to go after life first. That's why Planned Parenthood is such a bellwether right now. Yes. Where these guys come out on Planned Parenthood tells me exactly what they're going to do with taxes, exactly what they're going to do with budgets, exactly what they're going to do with spending. You start with first things first. Do that all the way down to dog catcher. That'll turn this nation back in the right direction. God bless you guys. Thank you.
Wow, take a breath. Take a breath. I've certainly enjoyed the evening, spending it here with you, with God-fearing, Bible-believing, gun-toting Christians in this room. So thank you for coming. It's been a great evening. I'm going to let Brian close out in a minute, but I do just want to make some announcements with the silent auction. You're all interested in that, I'm sure. The DVDs go to Mike Carter. The George Bush inaugural ice bucket goes to Cole Moore. This is important stuff. After what you just heard, I feel so incidental. The first day cover for the Ronald Reagan Memorial Stamp is Rick Holland. Rex Law, you got the George Bush pen set. Troy Sellers, the commemorative knife of Ronald Reagan's. The Rebel Without a Cause necklace goes to Charlene Carter. John Gatherer, the Texas flag duffel bag. Mike Schutt is getting the wine glasses. Really, what? I wonder how you're going to use those, Mike. Anyway, the Texas flag purse with the signature of Senator Cruz goes to Lisa Riddle. The initial outfitter's Fit for a Queen goes to Dorothy Johnson. And Lisa Riddle, also the Tastefully Simple Foods. Tony Watkins, the silver-proof medal and commemorative thing back there set. Kay Bryson, you get the Rick Perry pen, and also the Texas Seal lunch blanket. You folks were so generous tonight. 1981 inaugural day gold piece, Rick Holland, And Al Burkholder, you've got that 12 yards of sandy loam topsoil. Thank you so much for the things that you guys did on that.
So don't go anywhere. As everyone here is well aware, here in Titus County in Northeast Texas, we're blessed with some wonderfully talented people. And one that we've been enjoying the fruits of her work tonight, someone who is super organized, talented, knows how to put an event together, tireless, dedicated to these principles and to us. Let's just recognize and thank Sue Edelman for all of her work. As we close, let's do this. If you go ahead and sit down, we're almost done. I promise. If you volunteered, if you worked to set this up, to get us going, to bring stuff, you're going to take it home. If you had any part in this, would you please stand? I know so many people work hard to bring it. Please, ladies, men, everybody stand, please. I know some of you. Stand up. Let us recognize you. Thank you. All right. Amen. We're so thankful. So for our benediction, we're all going to stand together. If you feel like standing, I bet you do. Let's stand up. And let's do this together. For our benediction, let's sing God Bless America as a prayer from our hearts to the Lord. Let's do this together. God bless America.